Welcome to Guy Code, a podcast dedicated to imparting dad wisdom to my son, with your host, Koji Steven Sakai, and friends.
All righty, welcome. This is Koji, and this is episode number 54. I wanted to impart all of my wisdom to my son, but of course, my son already thinks he knows more than me. So instead of trying to tell him now and having it go one ear and out the other ear, I've decided to record them here in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, when he's ready, he'll listen to my advice in the future and not make the same stupid mistakes I did. And I'll be bringing on guests, my friends, who will be also giving their advice. And I have no doubt that their advice will be better than my advice. And this week, I brought on filmmaker Kerwin Berk. Kerwin, how are you?
Hi, Koji. How are you? Yeah, I'm good.
I'm good too. It's crazy times.
Yeah, it's madness.
Exactly. Well, Kerwin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Kerwin Berk. I'm from San Francisco, California. I grew up in Japantown here. Mixed race. My mother is Nisei. My dad was half Jewish and half Scottish. Went to the University of Texas because I just wanted to get as far away as I could from California when I was, that age. And it was as far away as I could, both geographically as well as culturally. Was a journalist for about 25 years. I worked in Asia for a few years. I worked in Chicago, Dallas, and I worked finally in San Francisco, the Chronicle, where I took a buyout in 2010 and just sort of gravitated toward filmmaking after that.
Wow, great. I didn't realize you were a journalist. That's exciting. Did you cover anything in particular or just everything?
Pretty much everything. Anything from, when I was in Asia, it was in the early 90s. I was working out of AP, and we were covering I was in Southeast Asia. So it was sort of the anniversary of the fall of Saigon, and also the Khmer Rouge was still kind of active in Cambodia. And there was the war between Vietnam and Cambodia was being brokered by the Japanese. So I worked there for a while. That was during the Gulf War. So they were scraping the bottom of the barrel to get people to work outside of the Gulf. Came back to the US, worked at the Chicago Tribune for a while. General assignment, I was an editor for a while. Same thing in San Francisco, and ended up working in sports actually towards the end. So pretty diverse range of things in newspapers.
Well, great. Well, I brought you in to give some advice to my son. So why don't we get into it? What's your first piece of advice?
First piece of advice. Good question. I should have thought of this a little bit more. Well, basic stuff, again, it's sort of follow your instincts. If, your gut will always tell you what's right and wrong. Never listen to your parents.
Wait. Why not listen to your parents?
Well, part of it's just facetious, but part of it is, cut your own path. Don't, not that you're necessarily a bad father or you have a bad mother. It's just that you need to, again, they're such a dominant influence on children that sometimes we pick up their perspectives and their points of view without thinking beyond it, because there's a whole world out there. And if you don't limit yourself, I guess.
That's a challenge.
And again, not that you're a bad dad or anything like that, of course. But
no. But it's something I always have to check myself with. For example, I love baseball. I played baseball for a really long time as a kid. I played pretty far, and then my son's really good at baseball. He's actually better than I ever was.
Right.
And I also have to check myself because I don't want it to be my dream through him.
Exactly.
but I want it to be his dream. So I was trying to push him I didn't want him to focus on baseball really early, because I didn't want it to be about me pushing him. And whereas I wanted him to say, I want him to do it because he wants to do it. Even if I know he's a really amazing baseball player, I didn't want it to be me pushing him. So that's totally valid, because I think that's a that's a concern of mine always. You know, I'm like, don't do. I don't want you to do baseball because I love baseball. You know, that's one of the reasons I stopped I stopped coaching.
But
too,
I kind of
because-
want you to do baseball because you like baseball. I like
No,
baseball.
exactly. But it's one of the, but I also have to try to keep myself from pushing too much. That's one of the reasons I stopped being a coach in baseball, because I realized that if I'm the coach, then it's even more like I have to go, he has to go, we have to, you know, whereas if I'm just a fan, then I have a little bit more perspective on, you know, if I see him out there, for example, if I see him messing around, or if I see him not like really into it, then that's a good sign that he doesn't really want to play baseball, you know, really like that's not something he wants to do. But yeah, totally. I think that's a great thing. Did you, as a kid, did you want to be what your parents wanted you to be, or did you forge your own
my
path?
dad died when I was very young, so it was kind of a single mother kind of situation. But there, you know, being Japanese, there's sort of family obligation where you need to, you know, take care of your parents at a certain age. So most of my career, or most of my early life, was pointed toward getting jobs that made a lot of money. So I actually went to school to be an engineer.
Okay.
But then weirdly, my mom got married while I was in college, and he was pretty well off. He's a doctor, and that sort of financial responsibility was no longer there. And I realized I didn't really want to be an engineer because it was like boring as hell. So I just sort of gravitated more towards, there's still a sense of practicality. So again, I wanted to be a writer. How can you be a writer and actually make money? So the next extension was journalism. So
that's a hilarious the story about your mother, because I had a similar thing. So my dad passed away when I was in college toward the end, and I had a job, a writer's job,
right.
but I wanted to move home to be with my mother, and so I took the highest paying job I could get at the time, which was being a buyer at Robinson's May, the May company.
Mm-hmm.
And first weekend I was home, my mom was hanging out with her friends and didn't come home till 3 a.m. in the morning. And I remember being like, why did I move home? I thought she's gonna be home by herself.
Right, exactly.
Like, right. I'm gonna spend time with her and we could hang out. But she was hanging out with her friends till 3 in the morning.
I stopped partying, and I was
exactly. I was like, what the hell did I move home for?
Yeah.
And I realized it was like a huge mistake in my life. But I should have known, because my mom always told me that I should do whatever I want to do. That is for my life, not hers.
Yeah, exactly. My mom told me the same thing, but it's sort of like, you know how the obligation and the responsibility thing is still
a good Asian kid, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kid,
exactly.
Right? Like that's kind of what you wanted to do. But yeah, so yeah,
the weirdest thing, my stepdad was Issei. He was a doctor visiting Stanford. He was doing research down at Stanford, and they met. And she ended up moving to Japan. They got married when I was a freshman, so they moved back to Japan. They moved back to Japan when I was a junior.
Yeah,
which was very odd. So she's been living in Japan ever since. So,
good healthcare.
The interesting enough, luckily she had learned Japanese when she was young. So, and as she gets older now and more forgetful, her English is kind of fading away. So the first couple of days I would visit, we would communicate through my bad Japanese and her bad English. It would get pretty comical sometimes.
Yeah, that sounds like me and my mother. Well, I'd love to hear some more advice.
Let me think. Invest early. Actually, you're probably going to be living in a post-apocalyptic world, given the way we've screwed up the environment. So,
yeah, that's true.
Watch Mad Max a couple times. Watch a lot of apocalyptic films.
What
kind of figure out your plan. Snowpiercer.
What kind of lesson from those films should he take?
Always have when you're buying a condo, make sure it's zombie proof. Like you want to be on the upper floors, and you want to make sure there's fire doors.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to make sure you have a balcony so you can see out, but you don't want it so low that the mutants or the zombies or the marauders can get in.
Well, funny, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts this morning, and they were talking about survival in end of the world. So I think this is a theme. But one of the things they said was you should get a group of rabbits, because rabbits ultimately, if you get 6 rabbits, you could end up having you could probably eat about 75 rabbits in a year.
Yeah.
And the rabbits have a ton of calories and protein.
Yeah. Good advice, actually.
And so they're like, so all you need is 6 in order to get 75, and you could cook it, you could stew it, you could do a lot of things with it, even though I'm not sure I could kill it, but I guess if you have to, right?
Yeah. Well, water will be the main thing
water
you want to watch out for. So you need water traps, catch rain as well as condensation.
Yeah. Although I have hope for this generation, though. Have you ever heard of the 4-generation cycle? It's a book that came out a couple of years ago.
Vaguely. Refresh my memory, though.
It's about this guy. He's a sociologist, and he believed that America had a 4-generation cycle that just ran every single time since the beginning of our history. And basically, every 4th generation has always been the greatest generation. So the 4th generation was like the first 4th generation was the American Revolutionary generation. The next one was the Civil War generation. The one after that was World War II. And
but that Civil War generation, aren't half of them bad?
Yeah, half of what they fought, but they won, right? Those people that time won, right? But the other half.
And
then the last one was World War II. And then now the kids now are basically like young toddlers to like Mike's son's age is kind of the top age of that, maybe like 15, 16. But these generation of kids have always been the generation that makes ginormous changes in the world, right? And so I'm starting to believe that maybe these kids will do something to help the world that we fucked up, right? But the one thing that's been marked with, I mean, if you look at all those, it's always been marked by giant wars, right?
Yeah.
And
there's a theme going on there.
There's a theme in these giant wars happening, but it's been really interesting to kind of see the progression. And the great thing that the book does is that it shows like all the press that happened about all the different generations and how they describe them. And actually, it's all really interesting. For example, all the things that they say about the kids now are what they said about the kids who became the World War II greatest generation. They said they were lazy. They said they're like coddled. That they were like that. Like, for example, there's a famous story. Have you heard the Patton story? The Patton story. Yeah, General Patton. He hit a kid during basic training.
Yeah. Sure.
And then the parents got mad because they said.
Oh, actually, it was during the war. It was the Italian campaign. He slapped him on the wounded soldier.
No, but before that.
This is a different story. Okay.
Yeah, this is before the war.
A different guy hit. Okay, different guy.
Different guy. He hit a kid during basic training, or not basic training, but during training part, and then everyone got mad about it. And then everybody said, how can we win a war if you can't hit people? And then, ultimately those kids are the ones that won the war, right? And they became the greatest generation. But it's really, really interesting. So I have a little bit of hope for these kids. They're really, it's really interesting to kind of see, that how open they are to things and.
Yeah, I do. Actually, I had this discussion with a former teacher on a cruise ship of all places. And it was sort of how this generation doesn't seem to have the hangups of either my generation or the one before. There's just things that, don't even faze them. It's like if you're gay, it's like, so what?
Yeah.
It's like, things like that. It's like things that are just so fundamentally non-issue.
Yeah. Like my son, we were looking at a snowman, like the snowman display. And I was like, oh, it's snowman. And my son's like, no, that's snow people.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, that's like, that's awesome. Because like when I was a kid, like if you're gay or you're just like kind of suspected to be gay, you got beat up, right? You couldn't. I was trying to explain to my son that I couldn't even like hug another guy because that would be quote gay. And like, that's terrible.
Yeah, exactly. You would sit like a seat over in a movie theater.
Exactly. And that's so stupid, right? Like just because you sit next to, like, it doesn't mean anything, being gay doesn't mean anything. It's not bad anyway. But I think that these kids and racially, I know all the issues going on, but I think, like racially, they don't see the world in the same way. So
yeah, I agree. It's sort of it's refreshing. I mean, like, there's a bus in San Francisco called the 22 Fillmore, and it goes from one end of the city to the other. It goes from the marina, which is really white and rich. It comes down Fillmore, it goes through Japantown, goes through the Western Addition, which is African American, then the Mission, which is Latino, and it ends up in Bayview, which is kind of Bayview, which is again African American, and so you get this real cultural mix if you're taking it from one end to the other. And I remember I was on the bus, and it was school was letting out, and kids in San Francisco ride city buses, not school buses. So all these kids are piling in, and we're going through the Western Addition, and I'm just kind of sitting there, just, vegging out. And I hear this kid yell out the window at a friend out in the street. He goes, "Hey," and he uses the N-word. And, "Hey, wait for me to get off the bus." And I turn around, it's an Asian kid. And I'm thinking, man, there's going to be a big fight, and I'm going to need to pull somebody off somebody. And, I could see everybody in the front of the bus who's older, kind of, even the African-American people were kind of like, what the hell? And the white people were just aghast. And so the kid yells this out the bus window, and the other black kids just start laughing. And I was just like, it was just like this moment of like, wow, things are really actually changing. It's just not changing within the circle that I'm in. And that sort of, again, it's very refreshing in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the things that's weird about what's going on in this country. I mean, it just feels like the Republicans have doubled down on this like idea that the country's not changing. And they've alienated like every kid who doesn't feel that same way.
Right.
And at some point, I mean, not only just like racially or ethnically we're changing, but I think even those that aren't a person of color, they also don't feel that, like that white people should only have this, or that black people are stupid, or whatever racist things.
Yeah, exactly. Right. These sort of things
Yeah, it's weird that I that's what I always don't understand. And, I mean, not to go on a rant about politics, but it's like Asian people are very conservative. Like, and now you alienate all the Asians who are conservative. You alienate all the Latinos who are conservative because of the Catholicism. And now
when I was a kid, they loved Ronald Reagan. Asians loved Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. I mean, my dad was a huge Reagan fan because he signed Executive Order 9, or he signed the Civil Liberties
Redress, right?
Yeah. So like
he also forgave amnesty for immigrants.
Yeah, exactly.
Big thing. It was like.
So he, but now it's like they've gone the other way. they're trying to hold on to something that did or didn't exist. But that's interesting. All right. Well, do you have any more advice?
At a certain point in your life, you're going to want to trade happiness for wealth. Actually, wealth for happiness. I take it the other way around.
Okay, wealth for happiness. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you might have a good job and you might be making a ton of money, but you also might find yourself not happy. And I mean, some people find happiness in wealth and the material things, but there's a certain amount. You may come the day when you realize that what you're doing with work, because it's so much a part of our lives, isn't fulfilling you either spiritually or creatively. And don't be afraid at that point to make a change if you need to. I mean, money's great. You need to save for retirement and all that crap, even though it's going to be a post-apocalyptic world. Remember that that happiness is huge. It's a big deal. It really, finding yourself in a good place is vastly underrated.
Yeah. Well, I think they've done studies where the amount of wealth doesn't make you happier, right? There's like a diminishing returns, right? On a certain amount of wealth, that at a certain point, you're as happy as you're going to be, regardless of whether you have $1 billion more or less.
That's what kills me about Republicans. Like, how much is enough? I mean, how much, is enough?
Yeah. Well, that is one of the big interesting conversations. I've read one of my favorite books recently. I've read is called the Sociopath Generation, which is about the baby boomers, and it's been really
reading a lot during this pandemic, huh?
Yeah. I read a lot anyway, but it's a really interesting book because and I kind of knew this, but for my work at the Japanese American National Museum. But what's interesting is if you look at a lot of these nonprofits, they were started by that World War II generation.
Right.
And they gave a lot of their money, a lot of their time, and then what happened was their kids stopped giving anything. or they didn't give as much, I should say. And there's more, and they saw the organizations as more of like the organization for their parents. So like, it's not just JANM too, it's like ACLU or any of these other groups too, right?
Right.
And so it's been really interesting. And then you look at like kind of the country, you know, I explained to one of my friends recently that before the 1960s, America was never in debt, that we always paid off our debts. I mean, we'd have war, then we'd be in debt, and then we'd spend the next 10, 15 years trying to pay off our debt.
Well, in the 50s, though, we were the last country, we were the only country standing economically. So,
yeah, exactly. But before that, we were always like, we tried to be, you know, to pay our debts off, right? But once Vietnam happened, then after that, it was no longer a conversation.
There was a short period in the early 90s where we were out of debt, but you're right.
So then, but I think that that's the philosophy of our country, in that we started mortgaging, you know, I mean, I don't know how much it affects our children, but I think even if it doesn't affect our children financially, it says a lot about.
Well, the deficit will definitely affect them. Again, it won't matter though, because post-apocalyptic world money won't.
But it's about values, right? It's like that value of like, do we want to saddle our children, even like with climate change and all of that stuff as well.
Yeah, we keep passing these sins off to the next generation. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, but it's funny that when you first said wealth over happiness, I thought that was an original take.
That was a Freudian slip. I mean, obviously I am built on greed. I mean, it's all about money.
Is that, so when you went from being a person that works in newspapers to a person that's a writer, is that kind of one of the things that you kind of decided that you wanted to be more about happiness, or is that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't think I consciously realized that for a couple of years. I remember being at the paper for a long time. And then when I took the buyout, and I was kind of getting up in the morning, I realized I didn't have to go into work. And there was a sense of dread that had just lifted. It was really amazing, because I realized at that point that I didn't actually enjoy going into work for the last few years. It was drudgery.
Yeah.
It didn't satisfy me in any way. So, and again, it took a couple of years for me kind of to put two and two together, though. It's sort of, you know, you need to eat, you need to pay your bills, you need to take care of your health, but money doesn't need to be your priority.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's actually interesting because for a lot of the advocates of a basic universal life income, this is part of one of the big issues.
Yeah, how do you feel about that?
I feel really strong about it, because I feel like in the coming, you know, next 50, 100 years, there's just not going to be enough jobs. I mean, just plain and simple. Like one of the most, the employer of most uneducated males between the age of 18 and 21 are truck drivers, right? The first thing that's going to taken away is truck. And there's entire towns and communities that are dedicated to the trucking industry, right? And that there's not going to have jobs. But I just don't feel like that there's going to be enough jobs in the future. And so I think one of the thing that people don't understand about universal life income is that basic life income is that I think that we're going to have to start taking away this idea that jobs equals who we are.
Right. The identity. Well, that goes back to the boomer generation. You wrap yourself into the identity of work is who you are.
Exactly. Because I mean,
it's a big break, right?
Yeah, because you have. I mean, because it's going to have to be that way where, you know, like Kerwin, you don't want to do whatever, and you want to do something else, and it doesn't either pay nothing. So it's okay. You might as well just go with what you want to do. You know, I think that I think that to me that's kind of where we went wrong as a society. Because, for example, when I go to like a party, like say my kid's birthday party, the first thing that I talk, like when people talk to me about who they are, it's always interesting. They always say, I'm a lawyer.
Yes, exactly.
About whatever. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. That's the first thing you say about who you are. You know?
Right. It's absolutely correct on that. Back to universal for a second. So the thing that, and I'm not against it, but there's a sort of pragmatic part of me that worries about it.
Yeah.
Because Andrew Yang has inadvertently solved homelessness to a degree, but not in the way he thinks. Because if you give a junkie $500, he's going to shoot in his arm and he'll be dead in 2 months.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, there's a sort of pragmatic kind of view that I have, like, it sounds great. And everything you said, I agree with, but it's sort of, how do you implement it in a way that it's not destructive? How do you give a homeless guy $500 and he hasn't been able to manage money? You know, it's like literally giving, I live in the Mission, which is a little sketchy some areas. If you give some of these people $500, I guarantee they'll be gone in 6 weeks.
Yeah. But on the same level, the difference in a situation where nobody has a job is that you're going to have millions and millions of people without jobs, right?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, there just has to be a fundamental way to somehow
make sure that
make
people
it
don't
work.
Yeah. And that hasn't been thought out necessarily how you actually get it to everybody and how it works. But I think
Right.
that as we do this, I think it's going to happen.
Right. And again, it's sort of, obviously it's very socialistic, but I love Republicans because, okay, Social Security by definition and by name is socialism.
Yeah.
And
but what I tell people who are, like very conservative Republican about it is that it doesn't mean that you still can't make a ton of money. Like there's
Right.
still going to be the next Facebook or the next Google.
Right.
Like that's why one of the things I'm trying to teach my son is the most important thing in this new economy is going to be thinking, like to be creative, not creative like me, like writing, but creative,
Right.
like what's the next Google? What's the next Facebook? Because those guys are still
not
going
even that. What's the next internet?
Yeah, that's going to make billions of dollars, right? Those guys are going to still make, and everyone else is not going to do whatever, but those people will still make billions. And so those are the kinds of jobs you need because, like in this incoming, like with AI, I mean, even lawyers. I mean, I've read studies how, AI lawyers are better than real lawyers and they're probably more pleasant to deal with, to be honest with you. You can just put it, I mean, there's so many, like,
Exactly.
like LegalZoom is like easy.
Yeah.
I don't have to deal with anybody. I just look up the contract, I put in what I want, and it spits out a contract to me, right? And it's cheaper than a real lawyer, and that goes, and then that lawyer, and doctors and nurses sometimes even, or some other people.
Well, you still have to have the hologram though.
You
still have to have, you can pull up, Perry Mason or the DA from Law and Order and he'll walk you through it. And it opens up acting jobs too, because you're going to need people to be the holograms.
I don't know though. I mean, have you seen the new Google, well, no, not new, but they have the Google call center. Have you heard about that?
I have not.
So they've Google create, I think it's Google actually, I shouldn't say, I'm not sure it's Google, but they've created a AI call center that takes calls, and actually people didn't realize that they were actually AI. So we've already taken, so at some level, maybe even we don't even need actors. Maybe.
Wow. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly right. You have to ask me a question that you don't expect, though. Like,
I mean,
what's my dog's name?
I think what's going to be interesting about that time, though, when it is like something like a basic life income, is that I think what it means is that you'll have some people who just sit in front of TV and get fat and die, right? Because
correct, which is what we do.
Yeah.
Now,
but I think some people though will, I think it'll be way more pleasant to be a parent, for example. I think people will follow their dreams a lot more. Like, I just want to hike a lot, or I want to be an artist, or like I want, like, a lot of the things that keep people from doing things are no longer there. And then some people will go to school and for not because like they want to be an engineer because that makes money, but because they want to learn, they'll go to do something that they want to do because that's what they want to do, as opposed to the outcome of whatever, like money financially, right? Like, you're not going to go to law school unless you really want to be a lawyer, right? Or you don't want it's like something that you really want to do. And in a lot of ways, I think that's better. One of the big problems with colleges to me is that a lot of people, like, everyone thinks they should go to college, which I don't believe is true, right? Not everyone is ready for college, or college, a person who should be going to college. But for a lot of people, I think that it's like, you might not be ready when you're 18, but then you get a job, you become for example, you become a mechanic, and then you hit a point where you need to have a more education, and then you go to school. And all of a sudden at that point, maybe at 25 or 30, you're ready for that school and you're serious and your life has changed. And now you're going to learn the things that you weren't ready to learn when you're 18, right? And that's the kind of college.
Tell it to a tiger parent though. Come on. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a tiger parent too, so I get it. But you know what?
Well, things change. Okay. So years ago, I was working with, when it becomes personal. I mean, we have this big picture approach to things.
Yeah.
And we believe certain things, but then when it becomes personal, it changes. I used to work with an education reporter, and he had a kid who was getting close to school age, and he was a big advocate of public schools.
Yeah.
And there was time when California was heavily considering vouchers, which undercut public schools. And he was very much against that. And he did, stories about it. And So we would talk, and I'm going to send my kid to public school when the time comes. And at that time, San Francisco public schools are pretty crappy. They're not great now, but they were very, very bad back then. And so a couple of years later, his kid's about to go to school, and we're talking, and he's putting him in private school. And I'm there like, dude, seriously? And he goes, well, yeah. And it hit home that way. He goes, I still believe in that in the big picture, but when it comes to your kid, you want the best thing for them. You want them to have the best education. And I got both point of views, and it was just really, I don't know if I've ever reconciled it, but again, it's also about, not to pick on the Republicans, but it's like, they don't give a shit about gay rights until their kid's gay.
Yeah, exactly.
And then their viewpoint changes.
Or they don't like black people until someone marries a black person.
Yeah.
It's just like, wait,
right. There's no empathy on the big picture. It's all like,
yeah, it's like
how
you have
it
to
affects
experience it in order to, which is the weirdest thing. Like I could like
believe it
people,
exists. Right.
I could like black people without having a black person in my family, or I could be okay with gay people without having somebody be gay in my family.
Right.
Like.
When you grew up in San Francisco, it's like your neighbors are gay, your teachers are gay. It's like you just don't even care at a certain point. Yeah. It's not even like. And then when you're working, like I was in Chicago for a while, and it was like I knew a couple of people at the paper who were gay but didn't come out, and it was just kind of like, you guys are still in the closet, and it was just kind of like, that kind of thing that just stuns you.
Yeah, but getting back to the tiger parent, one of the things I took from Amy Chua, right? Chua's book.
Amy Chu?
Is it? I don't know. Maybe I got it wrong. But anyway, the Tiger Mom book. Anyway. What's really interesting about it to me, though, I think she got it wrong in that, like the way she was kind of portraying it. But what is true is that Asian American families typically have higher expectations, right? Like you're not good. Like if you play a piano, it's like you're gonna go to the best. Like you're gonna play at the LA Philharmonic, right? Or you're gonna be, or if you want to be a politician, you're the president of the United States, which is fine because the expectations are really high. So what ends up happening is if your expectations, like you have to go to Harvard and you end up at Stanford, like that's great, right? Because you might not be at number one, you're at like 5, right?
So you fall to 3, you're a failure.
Yeah, but see, that's where the Asians went wrong, though, is that we like I think older generations withheld love when they didn't reach it. But what it actually does is that we've one of the reasons Asian Americans, like East Asians mostly, have achieved at higher standards is because that our base is so much higher. So if we fail to reach our base, we're still really good. Like, even amongst my friends my parent friends at my son's school, like when we talk, they're like, I hope my kid goes to college. I'm like, are you kidding me? I hope my kid goes to a top 10 university. Right?
Exactly.
Like, I mean, obviously, like I think we're like I said, where people go wrong is like, I would still love my son if he went to like a non-top 10 university, or if he went to a top 10 university. I just want him.
Yeah, but you'd love him more if he went to Harvard. You'd love him more.
I just want him I want the best for him. Like you were talking about, we expect that best. And, so for example,
it cuts both ways. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
When my son plays baseball, like my dream is like, okay, or not my dream, my goal for him is like the highest level he wants to go, whether that's high school or college or professional, whatever. Like he needs to.
You want him to play second base for the Dodgers? Give me a freaking break.
Totally, yeah, totally. Or he wants to be a catcher now, whatever. But that's like the goal. But it's really interesting. I mean, especially when I talk to other people of color, they don't have that same like goals, like the same like high level of goals. Like it's like, okay, like you just hope that your kid goes to college. Like I can't.
Right.
That's not even like like it's never been a question about whether you're going to college or not. Like, are you kidding me? Like the moment you're going to college.
Yeah, well, children also rise to the level of expectation too.
Exactly. So
I mean, if you don't push them to a certain extent, it's not going to happen. But as you said earlier on, there's a point where you're dominating their life in a way that's unhealthy.
Yeah, definitely. And I think.
All right, let's talk about. I want to switch the subject for just 1 second while I still have you, because you're actually really interesting to talk to. Model minority, myth of the model minority, and myth of the model minority. Okay, so think about that for a second. Process that for a minute.
Okay.
Okay, so we all know what the model minority is, right? Yeah. And then there's the myth of it, how it's not true.
Yeah.
And I propose that the myth that it's not true is also a myth.
Yeah.
So it's actually that, and what you talked about with your son too, it's sort of like, if you talk to any Asian American and you get them to be honest about it, Koji, are we doing better than the African American community?
Yeah,
Asian Americans.
We're doing better than white people.
Are we doing better than Latinos? Right.
Yeah.
So again, we're like the only one. Oh yeah, the Hmong suck.
Yeah.
Like I feel so bad for the Hmong because they're always like, oh yeah, the Hmong are doing really bad.
Yeah. Or any Southeast Asians,
like,
right?
They're bringing us down. So that part of the thing to me is true. Socioeconomics are higher, the salaries you make are higher. And again, not for everybody, but I mean, if you take it as a group.
Sure. Yeah.
Because you go to Asia and people fail.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that everybody's a success if you go to Asia. And I always sort of like want to tell people, when you're preparing your argument about the myth of the mono minorities, like, we're not doing worse than these other groups. We're actually doing better. And that needs to be pointed out. And then the second step, of course, of the second part of the mono minority thing is how white society will use that as why aren't you doing as well?
Exactly.
Which is kind of like, well, how come you're not as smart as your brother?
Sure.
Or how come you're not doing as well in school as your older brother, who's, great.
There was sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So there's actually a study in the beginning of the pandemic I was watching about, they were rating all the racial groups versus the society as a whole. And then they're rating those racial groups as a whole versus the world. And almost every category, Asian Americans were doing better financially, health-wise, weight gain, like amount of weight, how fat we are or not fat we are, life, like how long we live, in every category. One of the things I've been meaning to make actually as a video is I want to do videos where if Asian people treated white people like white people treat black people, it would be different, because in every category we're better. We have less incarceration than white people, less drug use, less abortions, better GPAs,
fewer people on welfare,
more, we make more money, we have higher education, in every way we're better, so like in categories wise, obviously not every single person, right, to be clear, like you said. So I do think that it's a myth that when people say that we aren't, but a lot of it has to do with our culture and our families and all that, and I think when people compare us to like other groups of people, it always makes me mad, because I tell them, if we were kidnapped from our homes and forced to be enslaved, where our culture and our language and our religion was taken away from us for 500 years, what do you think would happen to us? We would be terrible. We would have we would be not where we are today. It's because
and that's the second part of it. It's sort of so once you've established that, it's sort of like why. I was reading a piece about why there are very relatively few Black male doctors, and it was like, there's, and then boom, you see the category just falls off a cliff, and of course you're reading other stuff too, and one of them was about the systemic way that African Americans were treated after Reconstruction. That there was this separate world set up for them, and you put two and two together, and you realize that one of the conclusions you could come to is that, like, being a doctor just isn't in their it's not something they can be. It's not something they grow up like, oh, you can grow up and be a doctor. Like, our parents are like, yeah, you want to be a doctor, then be the best doctor, go to Harvard.
Well, they want you to be a doctor from the beginning, actually.
Right. And it's just sort of this, and in that community, it's just like, that's not even a discussion topic.
Well, I think a lot of it also has to do with the amount of fallback you have, the ability to make any mistakes. A lot of other groups, like, you can't make a single mistake because there's no way to fall. Like, there's, that's why a lot of middle class African Americans have trouble staying in the middle class, because if they lose a job for a second, they fall. Whereas like a lot of people who are like Asian, like, I could probably,
there's no second chance, right?
There's a second chance because I could just move with my mother, who has a nice home. like I could, like, or I could,
Yeah, but she's out all night partying, man.
yeah,
It
or they
sounds
could,
like,
they could float
what do
me
you
for a
do?
while until I figure out like what I'm going to do with my
Right.
life. But a lot of other communities, they don't have that ability. They don't have that ancestral ability to help you, like
Right.
in my
There's
family.
also the second thing too is sort of like, and again, this is sort of the part of the model minority thing to me that applies is that we're allowed to be in the game.
Mhm.
We're allowed to be in the success of it. We're allowed to be doctors and we're allowed to sort of be astronauts and have these opportunities. We only get to a certain point when the ceiling hits us, but we're at least allowed, to play the game, whereas other, African Americans, Latinos aren't necessarily given that opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, and that's sort of like the white society kind of playing a role in determining, who's in and who's out.
Yeah.
Like I can get into a great university and I can, any job I want to do. Again, you're going to hit a ceiling at a point, but at least I can get in that door.
Yeah. Yeah. Although that's what bothers me so much about when people talk about affirmative action or colleges, it's always like, well, okay, so for Harvard.
Yeah. Oh God, college. Holy shit.
For Harvard, you're saying, okay, it's all about, first, like you tell African Americans, Latinos, and other groups that it's all about the scores, right? You say it's all about scores, They shouldn't be allowed in. But then the moment that the Asians are better than you, you're saying, oh, it should be a well-rounded individual.
Yeah, it's not about that anymore.
Yeah,
right.
It's like not about that anymore because Harvard would be like 95% Asian.
Right.
Like the class would be 95%.
Stanford too, and Cal. Yeah.
And that's why, like when I get like fights with Asian Americans, I'm like, I don't want a school that's 95% Asian. I don't think that's good. Right. Like that's not a good school to me, like a good college, a good university. Like it should be a mix of people, all kinds of people. But you can't have it both ways either. You can't say like, okay, it's not about scores,
right,
and then it's about scores. It's like,
right.
It goes. That's what bothers me with that myth is that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and so you remember what was it, Prop 209 back in the 90s, the affirmative action ban?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I had a friend who was doing PR and. There was going to be a debate and she was involved in it. And she's of course against the ban. And so one of the practices was she would make me ask her questions and debate with her as though I was, as though I supported it, and it got really funny because like, again, you're talking about scores and how scores are the most important thing back then. And it'd be like, well, I mean, isn't it racist to think that Black people need help? They can't do it on their own. Do we think they're stupid? Mm-hmm. And that was sort of that was sort of the contrarian view. I don't obviously believe that, but that was the argument I was playing. And so you think Black people need a hand? Isn't that just being a plantation owner where you don't think they're smart enough to take care of themselves? And it got I was just playing this role and she got really pissed at me. It was really,
it comes down to equality versus equity, right? And I think
that's good. That's well put. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of philanthropists miss that because we could be equal if everyone starts in an equal place.
Exactly. The playing field is not, that was the ultimate thing we came out of. If the playing field were even, you could make that argument and it would stand up, but the playing field is
yeah. I mean, even from early childhood education to the kind of food that they eat, or even kind of how healthy the air is, right? I mean, those are all factors in that destroy, or even summer programs, right? They've done studies where kids from inner cities don't have a lot of summer opportunities. And so by the time they come back to school, they've already fallen behind. Whereas my kid has special tutoring and, he's going to come on and he's doing this.
I'm going to school in the summer. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Why am I going to school in the summer, Dad?
Yeah. Well, and that's why like the whole point is for you not to be, not to have to fall behind like kids who can't afford it, right? Or taking SAT classes. I mean, I had one of my really close friends was teaching SATs or something, and he was telling me one of his students actually paid for the SAT class on his own because he wanted to get a better grade, like an Asian kid. And I was like, yeah, that feels very Asian to me. Like that you're going to raise money to go to take an extra SAT class that your parents aren't willing to pay for. But yeah, no, I think that I think this is all really interesting in that, people always like my big problem with the model minority is that we're useful when we're useful, but we're not useful when we're not. And like you said, like, oh, why can't they do it? Why can't you be like them? And then my bigger issue is when Asians feel that way. When Asians start to feel like they're
that's sort of when the community kind of, there's, again, we talked about it a little bit earlier too, the generation before us were actually conservative. They really were. I remember growing up and supporting Hayakawa and who was insane, and Reagan, and again, and shop owners, small business people, they want lower taxes. They want they don't want to pay a minimum wage that is too high, and it dovetails nicely with sort of the Republican platform back then. But then you saw this amazing shift starting in the 90s and going through. And to me, it was sort of reflective of the Republican Party, because racism will trump anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I could believe with you in ideology, in politics, but if you're a racist, it's like, fuck you.
Yeah,
and it's like, I'm getting out of this party because you're just a bunch of white supremacists, and I'm out.
Yeah, I mean, I always joke that this should be my Republican days where I start to turn Republican.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I should be starting to be like, oh, it's about, it's about.
I'm not paying any more taxes.
Yeah, I don't want to pay taxes. But now it's like, well, like I can't go with whatever's happening over there because you guys are talking crazy, right? Although, I'm always surprised when I was at JANM. I mean, I don't even know how many times I would get calls from people who get mad at me about something about, like we said, about immigration. And they're like,
right.
oh, but Mexicans are super different than Japanese. They're here illegally, or they don't speak English. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like your grandparents?
You talked to G-chan lately? Because
they can't speak English. Yeah. And you think all of them came legally? You think all the Japanese came here legally? Like you're
my grandparents, man. They hopped a boat in Hawaii, landed in San Francisco. And
but so many of them think that because it's been like 4 generations for a lot of them.
Yeah, it doesn't apply, right?
That doesn't apply. But I'm like, wait, no. The same shit they're saying about Mexicans now, they said about Japanese 2 years ago. It's not that long. And we're different because our parents are actually, immigrants. So like my mom is an immigrant, but my dad wasn't an immigrant. But so I have that like immigrant mentality that a lot of the Japanese Americans don't. But yeah, I was always bothered. And I'm like, you guys forget everything. Or I got a lot of, also this is
selectively forget.
Yeah, even like with the Muslim, with everything that happened after 9/11 and all that, I got people telling me that, oh, that's super, like that would be super different if they arrested Muslims. If they arrested all Muslims, that'd be super different than Japanese Americans. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, they say things like, no, because they're Americans. That helped whatever, right? And I'm like, okay, so you're saying that there were no Japanese that didn't help. And even if they did, who cares? That still doesn't mean you lock up all Japanese Americans. I think just like you shouldn't lock up all Muslim Americans, even if one Muslim American helped, it doesn't mean all Muslim Americans are bad.
Right, exactly. It's like
people.
You kind of want to shake people. I was Orange County, John Wayne Airport. I was flying back from LA with my girlfriend at the time. She's like Japanese American on both sides, and literally it's like maybe a month later and it's still at that sort of that height of irrationality where you're not thinking. And there's a Sikh guy on the plane, the guy with the guys who wear turbans, and they throw him off.
Oh, because he's wearing a turban.
And it's just sort of like, so we're kind of like a couple of rows behind, and they literally, people are, worried about it. You could see them, and it's just sort of like, this guy's not even Muslim. And so my girlfriend gets up, she grabs her bag out of the overhead and walks off the plane. And like, I'm walking up there like, okay, I guess I'll go too. It was like, seriously, if you're not active in watching these things, they happen around you all the time. You just have to, you keep thinking as a country and a society, we've gotten a certain level, but we're really, fear is such a strong, irrational fear is so strong that it clouds your judgment in a way that's just, it's insane.
Yeah.
But again, in a post-apocalyptic world, none of this shit will really matter. It's just going to be like maybe hanging out with the white guys because they got a bunch of machine guns,
Although the biggest group of people who buying guns are Democrats, are liberals.
Yeah.
From 2016, we were buying a ton of guns, because I think we were afraid of.
You're kind of afraid, yeah.
Yeah. Now everyone has guns.
Yeah, well, that's all the myth of gun control. We go on for days. It's like even if you ban guns today, there's 500 million guns out there, so it's like big deal.
Yeah,
won't matter.
Well, Kerwin, how can people follow you? How can people follow your work and what you're up to?
Sure. Well, our last film's right behind me, but we're really not doing anything. EKB Films is our website.
Okay.
Go ahead and check it out.
I'll put a link, by the way, in the show notes, everybody.
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. I appreciate it.
And should they follow you directly or just follow the site?
Yeah, follow the site. I'm on Facebook. We really don't. Our marketing is dreadful. We don't really know how to, I don't even know how that came. We like making films, but we really are we have a couple. The great thing about working on films, I work with a lot of young people, so they're always I'm learning. When you get older, your circle tends to be the same age.
Yeah.
But when you're working in films, you meet a lot of people who are a lot younger, obviously, and you get to see perspectives that you wouldn't see normally. So that's really interesting. But the technology is just mind-numbing because it's like a couple of years ago, somebody's telling me about, do you have Venmo? And I'm like, what? It's like, and there's like all these sort of like, other social media things. It's like,
like Clubhouse.
Whatever. Yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Well, you have to have a Apple. So I don't have Apple, so I can't be a part of Clubhouse, unfortunately.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, we're lousy at marketing. And we have a YouTube channel, but I don't know if anybody actually watches it. So,
are you working on any projects now, or are you guys just taking a break while we're finishing up the?
We're thinking about turning the film behind us into a feature, but we haven't raised enough money yet, and this is actually the worst time because money's so tight.
Yeah.
And it will be for a while as the economy tries to regroup. So yeah, we're kind of in a weird limbo, and I'm kind of retired, so there's that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Good luck. I hope your children are somehow able to cobble something out of what we just talked about.
He will, I'm sure.
I doubt it. They'll be like, yeah.
He's like, I heard all this from you, Dad, a million times.
The only thing he's going to take away from this is don't listen to Dad. Don't listen to Dad.
Well, I prepared him for the apocalypse.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Bye.
Take care.